The Dakota Proclamation by Meredith Quinn, Musa. Page 112. Genocide, Treason. Who controls the cleanliness of the Indian? I have always said that the American Medical Association and its members do not have to administrate good medical practice in a territory which is outside of the jurisdiction of its creed and codes. One such place is an Indian reservation that falls under the absolute control of the Department of the Interior. What have we learned so far? The Department of the Interior and its activities cannot be questioned. No court can issue a writ or force the Department of the Interior to open its records. Now, this same protection of the Indians' health was transferred from the Department of the Interior to the Surgeon General of the United States Public Health Services under the supervision and direction of the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. It clearly outlines all functions, responsibilities, authorities, and duties related to the maintenance and operating of hospital and health facilities for Indians, and to the conservation of the health of Indians. This is found in Title 42, USCA 2001. What this means to the public and the Indian is: 1. The Department of the Interior can no longer be blamed for the poor health of the Indian. 2. Third-party tort, a wrongful act, injury, or damage for which a civil action can be brought, liability for hospital and medical care of the Indian can only come after permission from the Department of the Interior, Interior and Insular Affairs, who originally wrote this legislation. It would take an act of Congress before anyone could review the health conditions of the American Indian. Remember that there is no crime against killing an Indian on his sovereign homeland. Now, after this control, 2002 becomes a mess. But Title 42 USCA 2003 gives all the authority that is needed for whatever plans the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare needs to carry out its purposes. Which means that the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare is in complete control of the Indians' home, community, and land because it controls their sanitation facilities, including domestic and community water supplies and facilities, drainage facilities, and their sewage and waste disposal facilities, together with the necessary appurtenances and fixtures. What was left out? Oh, you can raise funds to help build hospitals with your gifts and money for the Indian, according to 2004A, 234, BC, 2005, ABCDE, but 42 USCA 2005 F clearly states that there is only one kind of health care the Indian will get, and the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare will be in control of it. After you've played with this, remember that according to the Genocide Convention, you still have to prove that these deaths were not for curative purposes. The following 4 pages are some graphs taken from the book, The American Pogrom, which America is not ready to read just yet. With the permission of the authors, study what is said here. The letter of the law. What race of people outside the Indian of North and South America could live by it? None. There is no letter of the law that states the Indian is to receive the practice of good medical care on his health. To those that still want to stand up and wave your flags, first tell the truth and say, this country is not a melting pot of the races of the world, but a country that believes in oppression, suppression, and prejudice of non-white people. And then there is a chart, the infant mortality rates from 1930 to 1966. Chart showing the percentages of death due to accidents and violence. A chart showing variation in infant mortality since 1930. And the ratio of deaths of children in early infancy to those of newborn infants. And of course, the levels of deaths for Indians are higher than all else. Page 118. Persons, inhabitants, savages. I'm not going to trouble you with a lot of facts and figures about Indian health. You will get the same kind of concern I received from organizations who returned from Washington, D.C., who follow the plans of this city. Mercy is not one of the feelings that can be found in most charitable functions. And for the killing of a people, the business end of any of these clubs to ask is, what can they do to help? If everyone knows it is well-established fact that a state of genocide did exist on the reservations, and the proper authorities were aware of it, and that organizations and government agencies had all the facts and figures needed, and were at the present interested in other problems of the Indian. So this chapter is written for Indians to teach what genocide is and what it means, because you're going to be the only ones that take care of it. No Jewish people are going to run to the front and help. Again, a savage must go against the great authorities on this subject and teach what it is. Genocide, as it is constructed, interpreted, and understood, is so complex that few men in the world will ever understand it, let alone make an evaluation. There is, however, two schools of thought on this subject. One recognizes this crime against humanity. Two sees only to control the privilege of representing attorneys, person or persons accused of these crimes, having no recourse other than facing the facts of the crime committed. The guidelines of these crimes are well defined. The only acquittal or freedom those accused of these crimes can receive is if the bodies or documentations were to vanish into thin air. It is a well-established fact that attorneys who have the only control of representation of persons on murder charges would lose a great deal of profit and prestige, because crimes where one person or persons take a human life of a person or persons are not always murder, but better than half fall into the category of genocide, rendering the present legal techniques obsolete and outdated. But, being Indians, let us reason as Indians. Legally, there are three classes of physical beings, according to the white man's law. 1, person, a human being. 2, inhabitant, natural home of an animal resident. 3, savage, remote from human. Now he also has 3 domestic crimes of murder that apply to human beings only. 1, premeditation. 2, passion. 3, accidental. Now, the arguments of attorneys arguing so that the United States would not have to sign the Genocide Convention was expressed against the convention, that it converts crimes traditionally domestic into international crimes. Yet no domestic law exists in the two basics concepts of the Convention. What kind of murder? 1. The intent to destroy a group. 2. The connection between the acts or acts directed against individuals and their membership in the specific group against which the action is directed. Now, domestic murder is against a person, by a person, classified as A, human beings. Genocide is a crime against humanity or human beings. The arguments start when the wording in the Convention brings in groups and their members. True, there is no genocide in the United States against human beings. There is, however, genocide against inhabitants and savages who are individuals who have and practice membership in groups, i.e. classified by federal statutes: Chinese, Mongolians, Mexican Americans, one who speaks Spanish or has a Spanish surname, and Negroes. These make up the class of inhabitants. Indians with their members and tribes are classified as savages. What the Genocide Convention does is jeopardizes for some and brings into scrutiny for others their citizenship in the United States, which is open only to persons. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Treaty of Louisiana, Treaty of Florida promised the inhabitants that someday they may have citizenship and a constitution like the one of the United States. It would also add a category to the domestic crimes of murder, intent. Currently, the reasons for domestic murder is still in the basics of animal reaction, which would now make it possible to view it intellectually and open it for scrutiny to the sciences of the ideology practiced in the country where this type of murder occurred. Say what you want, but attorneys practicing under the judicial system of the American bar can never permit a category of domestic murder called intellectual murder to enter into the courts, for it would uncover controlled slavery, which everyone now assumes is freedom. So genocide is an act that takes not only the living life, but the principles and ideas for which this life was born and bred. Genocide is intellectual murder for which the civilized man has not found a way to bring this type of murder into his law system or his court system, was put together to protect itself from this type of murder. Much is being said on the subject of genocide these days. The blacks and Mexican Americans both claim such acts are being inflicted on their groups. Reservation genocide. Yet nothing is being done to bring this charge to the public's attention or to the eyes in the world. Why? The United Nations, in their draft on the Convention, Annex 6, said it was an act against the law of the nation, against civilization, and against international order and peace. They proclaimed genocide as intentional destruction of a group of human beings, which inflicts irreparable loss of humanity by depriving it of the culture and other contributions of the group so destroyed. They pledge themselves to prevent and to repress such acts as the destruction of racial, national, linguistic, religious, or political groups of human beings. The acts of genocide are described as those acts which there is involved in the causing of death, the injuring of health or physical integrity, group massacre, individual executions, the subjecting to poor conditions of life by lack of housing, clothing, food, hygiene, and medical care, the mutilation of people by biological experiments imposed for other than curative purposes, the deprivation of all means of livelihood, the confiscation of property, the looting of same, the curtailing of work, the restricting of births by sterilization and compulsory abortion, the forcing of transfer of children to another group of humans, and the prohibiting of national language, even in private intercourse. Include also the systematic destruction of historical and religious monuments or their diversion to alien uses, and the destruction or dispersion of documents and objects of historical, artistic, or religious value. The United Nations must have visited an Indian reservation to write this draft. Any school child from high school could find enough acts here to make a successful charge of genocide. Article 2.1.2 acts here to make a successful charge of genocide. Article 2.1.2 would convict any anthropologist, archaeologist, ethnologist, or geologist of genocide against the American Indian. Article 3 would convict any government official in the service of the United States. Article 2 would convict any newspaper, book, author, history teacher, radio, or television station. Article 10, first and second, would convict the attorneys and judges in this country. Even though the United States did not sign the Genocide Convention of 1949, it could never sign if the draft by the Secretariat of the United Nations would have been the standard by which to investigate genocide charges. The U.S. Army charged and tried the German nation with genocide and also wrote a draft, Annex 7, for the Convention on Genocide. When you read it, you now know why the charges of genocide by the blacks and Mexican American have no foundation. In the U.S. Congress of the Foreign Relations Committee, we have a chairman of the subcommittee called Genocide Convention, who is a member of the committee that rules and controls by legislative powers all the rights and property of the American Indian. Now, Congress of the United States also had an ad hoc committee which wrote another draft for the Genocide Convention. It is this draft one must study. It will show you that it removes all the important concepts found in the one the United Nations wrote. It makes this convention and what it is to do a powerless confusion. And remember, the United States did not sign this convention. The most noted concept of this draft is that it came up with classified types of genocide: physical or biological, and cultural genocide. Now, Article 2 of this draft states that in order for a charge of genocide to have power to punish the whole nation of the United States, the white race must make a charge that a condition of genocide exists and that it goes against the religious belief and public opinion of that nation. This could mean that killing, maiming, inflicting harm, and imposing techniques of death are not a reason for genocide, or what is called physical or biological genocide. Article 3 of the draft states that before cultural genocide can be charged, it must go against the policies and beliefs of the U.S., conflict with its religions, and be voted by the white people of the U.S. that a charge of genocide does exist. This concept came out of the Nuremberg trials, according to the U.S. Army. Now, the Jews claim that they suffered greatly at the hands of genocide. 6 million lives were lost in Germany. We, as Indians of North and South America, experience these many deaths every 6 months because of genocide. You don't see us crying about it. Yet Jewish scholars stand around with pencil and paper, taking notes on how it's done to us. Ask them to help, and guess what their reply is? Give me your facts and figures so I can write a book. Maybe we can get something done. Personally, I have only one reply to this. Go to hell. The Indian of the Americas has suffered the greatest systems of genocide. No other race of people in recorded history can show in numbers the population that has been murdered under the concepts of religion or peace or even education. His was the greatest in the ability of war, but his frame of mind had no concept of slavery or destroying a foreign culture. An Indian Genocide Convention. The right to have a genocide convention belongs to the Indian and no other. There is no other race of people with their concepts having the intellectual, international, civilized, or community law able to remove the color lines between peoples. It's time that the death problem of the Indian have a full investigation. But the Indian must keep and run the investigations. The only possible way that genocide can be presented to the world for review on some of the ways and activities presently in the United States would be to use the sovereignty of Indian rights. First, he is a sovereign nation with a treaty with the United States, so he does have a nation, language, race, religion, and politics separate from the United States. Second, he has had his complete culture ruined by another nation, which promised it would do everything in its power to protect it. Every violation in the draft written by the United Nations can convict on a charge of genocide by the Indian against the United States. Third, Mongolian, Chinese, Negro, Mexican American, Spanish surnamed, classified by federal statutes as inhabitants, have never had citizenship or constitution presented to the Congress of the United States to be enjoined to the rights of American citizens. The Indian should write constitution and citizenship for all peoples of the world other than white in order to have rights and be recognized nations to be part of the civilized nations of the world. Fourth, put together a genocide convention and ask all races that have been victims of genocide, but keep it Indian, in Indian control. If the Jewish wish to join, fine, but don't let them run it. Gain fellowship with those that have had this technique used on them. These are the people that the Indian should teach the techniques of survival to. Do you ever wonder why the Navajo will steer clear of dead people? Let me ask you another question. Do you know anything about the Indians' method of burial? Okay, let me ask you another question. When whole villages were slaughtered, who and how were Indians buried? How could a nation bury 90 million bodies without any records? Still better, how could Indians bury 90 million persons? You've heard of the announcements of the anthropologists and archaeologists of their great finds on Indian burial grounds that they considered to be several thousand years old. Don't be fooled by this unwritten event of Indian history. From the beginning of our races, a burial was a family or clan affair. But what the white man knows of Indian bodies and how to dispose of them can fool the best sciences of his own educational system. The best disposal method of human bodies was perfected by the Catholic missions, who had absolute authority over the Indian. Their method was to throw all Indians who would not convert into lime pits. What will age human bones faster than lime? There is much research on the mission lime pits, because every mission had one. Have enough lime pits, and the area will become a desert. It wasn't until 1898 when they passed a burial act forcing everyone to bury in a cemetery that deaths could be accounted for, except Indians. Most California missions have a burial ground holding around 1,200 graves, yet their own history states that when the ships sailed up the coast, All along the way, it was heavily populated. How many persons would it take to make the California coast look heavily populated? Yet 27 years after the first mission was built, the Indians were few and far between. The way to get rid of unwanted bodies was to throw them in the lime pits. Today, lime is outdated. Death for the Indian has progressed. High-speed cylinders, refrigerated, moving at a whirling pace, sticking 30 feet above the ground, with a base 60 feet buried, shows the advancement of the Indian into the white man's world. But the universities and colleges will continue to write of great Indian burial grounds that date back before God, when man pounded on his chest and picked up a bone and started to club everyone he could see. I can see the Pope, historians, the elite of the world, rolling with laughter, unable to stand. As Indians, there is much work to be done in the North and South American countries. For example, this appeared in Time magazine July 10th, 1972, in the village of Villa Vicencio, Colombia. In 1967, 6 cowboys or llaneros, women, invited 18 Cuiba Indians to a ranch to an alfresco buffet of meat, rice, vegetables, and fruit. When the Indians sat down to eat, the ranch boss, Luis Enrique Morin, signaled, and the cowboys came in shooting and slashing. When it was over, 16 Indians lay dead, including women and children. 2 escaped and later told a priest. Otherwise, this incident would have gone unnoticed by the rest of the world. Let me quote some of these great civilized people who are also half-breeds or whose parents were products of the missions. Part Indian. Luis Enrique Morin. For me, Indians are animals like deer or iguanas, except that deer don't damage our crops or kill our pigs. Since way back, hunting has been common practice in these parts. Marcelino Jimenez. If I've known that killing Indians was a crime, I would not have wasted all that time walking just so they could lock me up. Defendants. All I did was kill the little Indian girl and finish off 2 who were more dead than alive anyway. Defense. Others had done the same thing and gone unpunished on the Llanos. 3-man jury. Defendants were not responsible for the crime because of their invincible ignorance. The blame should fall on all Colombian governments, since the conquistadors for doing nothing to improve the way of life in the vast outback, where Indians have been regarded mostly as marauding animals. A little fact to remember. Bolivia, Colombia, Dominican Republic, New Zealand, Paraguay, Peru, United States, and Uruguay have not ratified the Genocide Convention. What can you expect from these countries but genocide? Remember earlier in the chapter about attorneys who would have to face the charges of genocide for their clients? Because the guidelines of these crimes are well defined. If a charge of genocide was presented, the only acquittal of freedom would be that the bodies or documentation would have to vanish into thin air. But the bodies or documentation would have to vanish into thin air. But if there is no charge for genocide or a law against it, then attorneys could blame these crimes on a way of life, civilized life. Jewish people, I don't ever want to hear you talk about your small little tiny genocide that occurred in Germany, because remember that this act in Colombia has been going on for hundreds of years. And nobody cares. Not even you. Read El Delito de Genocidio, Mexico, 1951. Octavio Colmenares Vargas. The reports of the Special Committee of Peace and Law, through United Nations American Bar, Annex 6 Draft Convention, prepared by the Secretary at page 62 through 66. Annex 7 Draft Convention, prepared by the Ad Hoc Committee, page 67 through 74. Genocide Convention of 1949, pages 30, 32, 33, 44 through 49. But genocide is only an argument that all minorities can spend years trying to find a way to get some kind of help for. It's aid that actually can never materialize, because only an Indian has the sovereignty base to work from, and nobody is going to let the Indian have his day to try and save mankind, including the minorities. But genocide, in my way of thinking, is a cover-up for special interest groups to rearrange races and groups of people to start a new political move, like pawns a game of chess. It's time for the manifest destiny to start the new wars between the white man or white nations on who will control the wealth. Who are the pawns? Right, the races which are not white. Because only the white control manifest destiny. The cry is out. The blacks say genocide. The Chicanos shout genocide. The white brothers also say genocide. It's true. White brothers are trying hard to help. But why the silence? Then you hear it softly at first, but it grows louder. Others join in. Let's form a nation. We're Indians. Let's come together because we have something in common. Some of us are called mestizo, and we have our nation south of you. We're a nation of Indians, and our brothers, our half-brothers, are without rights on this side of the border. We have every right to come together and become one. Let us form a new Indian nation, with Indians only. But as an Indian, I too have an idea. Come join us, because we can create protection. We already have all the rights that come with a group that has 161 sovereign nations within one nation. Then you hear the reply. No, Chicanos are stronger, for we have 6 million in the Southwest alone, 50 million south of the border, and we're all Indians. But behind the scenes in Mexico, the white man rules, which is no different than he does here. You are not a mestizo. You are a terminated Indian, in which your forefathers gave up treaty, language, culture, and lands, so you could become this mestizo, which means you can only be half white. Come back, and we'll show you how to put the complete culture together. The Chicanos will reply, no, we have a political, cultural, and national identity. We are a race. We are every bit the Indian you are. We even have a national language. Indian? What is it? Mexicans. Haven't you heard of the Mexican language? No, I've been to Mexico, and all I heard was the Spanish language. There was a long pause. True, he is Indian, only he is caught in a trap of the white man. In bloodline, he is Indian. He has reached this point in his life and must have a little help to make it to the other side. As an Indian, should we fail him now? He must be shown that this idea has been tried before. I begin. Let me tell you a story of another man who is half white and half Indian. He too had a political, cultural, and national identity. He too had a national language. He was very much a race. He was called a Métis, named by the French, and his language was French. So the trap of the white man has almost the same kind of name. What happens to you does count. You will be used as a pawn in his game, the same game that the other brother fell into. We fight the same enemy, the one that uses us for his personal gain. We have other brothers that need our help, and those that want to help.